and this is the only part of the class, only class you're in, and you aren't just finished 3 classes, you're more than welcome to join in the deacons meeting. I like doing online stuff, but I'm used to being able to talk to people. Ben, are you going to say stuff or whatnot? Use someone to on your end, or is it always super echoey if you do it? Do you, if you look on yours in the bottom left, do you, Ben, do you have the correct audio source selected? Because sometimes if you don't have the audio source in the speaker both selected at the right place, it feeds back more. Mary can hear me well, but when Ben, who's over in Claremont in the room, started talking, then it got all echoey. Ben's going to check. All right. Well, as he's checking, do people have permission to mute and unmute themselves? If not, you can give them permission. Just make sure it's set that if you join, you start muted, so you don't have like that one person who joins 20 minutes in and is eating a sandwich, and all of a sudden all of us hear the person eating their sandwich, and they don't know that's what everyone's hearing because you don't hear yourself. All right. All right, so we'll assume Ben's is permanently echoey, but if everyone should be able to mute and unmute themselves now, that's excellent. And so if you want to test that, you're more than welcome to. Or in the side, in the chat area, Kevin can't unmute himself. Oh, poor Kevin, not getting unmuted. Don't worry. It's not because CST doesn't want to liberate all voices. It's technological. Do.
Okay.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
That worked.
All right. There we go, gallery style. So there's Scott, Aaron, Kevin. Hello. We have non-video participants, so hi non-video participants. And we see people gathered in Claremont. If you're participating and saying to yourself, well, there's so many people in that one room, you can oh, they're zooming around. Look at that. It's just group waving. And it's hot in Claremont today. Is that right? Oh, I forget. They can't talk. Well, it is hot there. I know that I live in Redondo Beach. I teach at the Hatchery in Redondo, which is like a startup seminary. You do a master's in theological studies and public theology and one in social entrepreneurship, and you're starting a common cause community, which is like a business around a justice cause, a nonprofit activist group while you're in school. So on top of that being an odd collection of students that you get to hang out with, the best part about the difference between Redondo Beach and Claremont is 20 degrees on a lot of drives to Claremont. When I was doing my classwork, I would leave the beach in LA and it'd be nice, 72 degrees, ready for jeans and a t-shirt. And then I would get to Claremont and my jeans would stick to myself within like 30 seconds because it's 90 something degrees. You have to have the sweet love of John Cobb there in order to choose that 25 miles of distance, 2 hours of driving, and 20 degrees. That's the difference between Redondo and Claremont. But my first time at Claremont was during the Process Summer Institute. My wife and I, Alicia, between our finishing undergrad and starting seminary at Wake Forest University's Divinity School, we went to the Summer Institute, took a class with Marjorie Suhaki in the morning and John Cobb in the afternoon. And then we watched a movie, and I met Marjorie and John and David Ray Griffin and Robert Mesley. Patricia was there. I met Janine for the first time. It was everything my 22-year-old nerd self ever dreamed of. So hi to all of you there. One thing that will be helpful is if you at any point, like after the class, if you're sitting there saying to yourself, I'm in a room, and I don't know if everyone in the room is allowed to use the message board or not. Ben can type as the voice of the people if you can't. But I want to give up front a real clear outline of what we're going to do. So if you're like right now, go, okay, day 3, we're talking about this. I want to know this. Anything you email me short of something I know nothing about or can't pretend I know anything about or can't find it on the internet prior, I'll make sure we fit it in. I know you're picking 4 days out of your summer to be here, to nerd out, which is awesome. So make sure to tell me the questions and stuff that come up or that you brought in so that we get around to them. That'd be a great. And my email address to do that is trip with 2 P's, TRIPP, at homebrewedchristianity.com. I'll just put it in the sidebar. Homebrewed Christianity is my website. There's a podcast. If you like process, then there's plenty of it on there. So they're long form interviews with lots of things. And if you have topics, oops, I just typed to Ben privately. That's not what I wanted to do. Copy. You're like, where did you put your everyone? Ha. There we go. There it is. On Twitter, it's at Trip Fuller. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I still have like 150 voice messages, and I have like a 1.5-minute long voicemail, like clearly just for you to text me or tweet me. And it even says it in the voicemail. But don't call me, tweet me, email me, and I would love to know what you want to do, where you want to go. It'd be great. If you want to say it instead of typing it, on the side of homebrewedchristianity.com, there's a button that's like leave a voice message. If you hit it, it will record you talking for up to 3 minutes and send me that file in an MP3. So if you are sitting there going, I don't even know how to ask this question, but it's kind of like how's process relate to kind of postmodern theories of community and the emergency whatnots with the practices at the church, but do they understand them, or is it more experiential and stuff? Like that question, I don't know how you type it, but I know the vibe of it. So you could leave it as an audio message. Yeah, so you can email me, you can tweet me, you can leave the audio message, and we will make sure where we go ends up being places you want to go. Also, there is if you're an individual signed on, there is the ability to raise your hand, and you can use that, or you can type a question just to me on your message thing. And the message can be, I have a question. That's perfectly cool. As part of Homebrewed, there's a group, a year-long reading group called Epic Reads of like people that listen to podcasts and such. And Philip Clayton and I do it once a month. And over the course, I figured out that just reminding everyone there's a bunch of ways of reaching out and feeling free to interject your questions. I can kind of skim the side questions and make it seem like the question you sent privately is getting answered. And then you can be like, Trip, that's absolutely not what I was meaning. and then I'll try to answer it again while not letting the other ones know I'm answering your questions. It's a fun, processy game. I try to prehend the intention of that question, and then I try to get something to concrete that seems logical or reasonable to you, and we can have a nice little private back and forth. Ben, who's in the room, he is the voice of the people in that room. He's a Pentecostal, so he is very open to all sorts of experiences. Don't feel like you just have to raise your hand to him. He also is quite a bit of fun to hang out with. So don't let just him sitting there as the voice of the people keep you from hanging out with him after or asking questions. And Ben has been fully authorized to interject and tell me I'm wrong, say it a different way, or just say whatever he wants, because he's one of my favorite Claremont students, and I wish I got to talk to him more. So maybe you're the occasion for us talking some more. All right. Now I'm going to say a few things up front. One, I'm going to say a little bit about myself. Then I'll tell you about the class outline, because I've kind of mentioned how it works. And if you want to invent new rules for how it works, so that everyone feels like we're participating, let me know. I will say if it's your first time doing something online, like the third time, it doesn't seem as weird. So by the end of the week, you'll be a champ, and it'll be all good. So I'll talk about me, talk about the outline of the class. For those of you that are taking it for credit, I have a few books I'll show you. My theory on teaching when it goes to assignments and for reading is to give options, and then you pick whatever out of that reading connects with the questions you have coming to the thing that equals, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours of reading total for the week, because you're just a 1 hour class. You're doing all these others. So don't go like, oh, I just read all 4 books Tripp did, and then I wrote this long paper, longer than necessary, lots of footnotes. No. Hopefully by the time we get done, you'll know that the most processy thing you can do is actually relate to the human beings around you and yourself and this beautiful creation and such. So you'll be ingesting information for inspiration, for clarification of thought, not to repeat it back to me. That's boring for both of us. So I'll talk about the books, and then I'll tell you some of the big chunks for the day. In the past, doing online talks and questions and such, I found that if I tell you, here are 3 randomly connected topics, but in my head that make perfect sense, I'll talk about a chunk, which is obviously a beautifully chosen word to talk about a bucket of knowledge. I'll talk about it, and then if you have questions that we haven't managed to get to via the chat, you can ask them, and then we'll move on. If we don't get to all 3, that's totally cool. Or if we get done early, I can start a chunk from theoretically tomorrow. It's all good. Any way you want to do it. And if you have questions after we get through all 3 that are more meta or where we're going or what you're intuiting, then we'll talk about that. So it kind of go like chunk questions for clarifying type of stuff, not like, I'm writing a PhD thesis on this that's unrelated to what you said, so let me just ask it. But like chunk questions, chunk questions, chunk questions. Meta. Yeah. All right. So first, me, Tripp Fuller. I grew up in North Carolina, church planters kid. My family were church planters. I went to Campbell University, was a philosophy and religion major, which was 1 degree, and a double major in musical theater. When I went to art magnet school, I love theater. And so when you're deciding between being a theater teacher and a professional academic or a minister, you say to yourself, obviously money's not making this decision. So you just, which one do you get to use it all? And you can be religious, nerdy, and a performer all in the classroom. And teaching has been a real blast. So that's how they all got connected. I moved out here to do my PhD at Claremont after finishing my MDiv at Wake Forest University, and I worked at a rather large UCC church in Palos Verdes in Los Angeles while doing my coursework and all that kind of stuff at Claremont. Now I'm Director of Theology and the Humanities at the Hatchery here in LA, which I mentioned a bit about earlier. Think like startup seminary, theologically nerdy social entrepreneur for progressive Christianity and types of communities that don't suck. Something like that. That's not our official tagline. I have 2 kids. Elgin, who is like 3 days away from finishing 2nd grade, and Cora, who's 2. The UCC, United Church of Christ. It is in the United States, more progressive Protestant one, like kind of first on most justice issues, like being open and affirming, divesting from fossil fuel, stuff like that. But that doesn't mean every church is like that. It just means the ones that vote when we get together are. But anyway, Barack Obama was one. I guess he's probably the most famous UCC person. Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah, anyway. It's Congregationalist. So the school I teach at now is connected to the Disciples of Christ, which are also Congregationalist and one of the more progressive mainline denominations. So, but that's progressive for America. I know if you're in Canada, we're still wussy. So let's see here. I was a youth minister, then associate minister, then minister of education, then a senior minister left. And I was stuck in charge of all sorts of things because we had like a year and a half to get an interim, followed by an interim. And I ended up in charge of a lot more stuff during that process. So after that, I said, I don't want to be a senior minister. So I turned down those jobs, was unemployed for 6 to 9 months before getting the teaching position I'm at now. And if you're a senior minister, God bless you. Mary was Baptist. My family was Baptist, but we were Baptist church planners. And eventually the denomination eliminated us. So we were just free agents at that point for winning a baptism award. But when they come to give it to you, they're freaked out that gay men are in your choir. It's a conundrum in the South. But now they just legislate in North Carolina where you go to the bathroom, which is its own problem. I'm really glad that's over with. All right. So the class is on contemporary religion, spirituality, and engaged community, in particular the church, via process-type theology. It's organized. Today we're going to talk about the nature of religion, religious belief and faith, processy, styled in a postmodern context. And then we will, in day 2, look at spirituality, namely that the process is spirituality. We'll talk about the Pew Forum data, the nature of human beings as spiritual beings in our contemporary kind of culture and things, understanding the difference between religion and spirituality, process style, and what it's like to cultivate both religious and spiritual things. It'll be fun. Then on day 3, we're going to talk about culture and technology. And we'll talk about the culture that's in crisis, but also the need to do theology post-Google. And on Wednesday, on day 3, Barry Taylor will be joining me. And Barry Taylor, you could Google him, but he teaches at the LA Arts Center. He was AC/DC's sound engineer who then did a PhD in religion and pop culture. He's just awesome. He and I did the companion podcast together for the National Geographic show, The Story of God with Morgan Freeman. And we've been teaching a couple classes on technology, culture, and such. So that's his area of specialty. And I was like, you need to come, and then we're going to argue about 3 topics for all the people in this class. And he's like, I'd love to argue with you. Maybe they'll all agree with me and can finally set you straight. So that can happen. Then on day 4, we will look at the nature of community, and in particular Christian community, having looked at religion, spirituality, and culture together. That one, I hope, will be more directed by the kind of the conversations and questions you have. The movement can include, if you're like, oh, I'd much rather it be more abstracting type, nerdy type stuff, Cool. Let me know. I'm serving as a insert the position type of thing. Here's what I'm wondering about thinking through. Insert that, and we can go there. The whole order and series of talks is one I've done in a variety of different settings, and I really enjoy having like 6 pages of notes per day and using a third of it because we go directions that y'all are energized in. I enjoy it more, so make sure you give input, email, voicemail, Twitter, whatnot, or give it to Ben, Voice of the Peeps, and we will redirect how we go. So those are kind of the 4 themes for the day. The books, if you're wanting something to read that's connected to what we're doing and are doing it for class, again, you're reading, connecting your passion to the text around the questions you're interested in. But since this is a process class, Religion in the Making, which is Whitehead's, well, it's the only book of his you can read in one sitting because it's the text of 4 lectures he gave out loud. And he lapses into clarity like every 5 pages in this. It's not like Process and Reality where you have to have student loans to understand it. It's also where he talks about what religion is, how it changes over time, its relationship to culture and power, and all kinds of fun stuff. So we'll talk some about it today. And then day 3, other stuff that's in it pops up. If you are serving in a congregation or nonprofit leader and things, this would be the most fun one to read. It's Edwin Friedman's A Failure of Nerve. Edwin Friedman is a family systems theorist who he's Jewish, and this book, A Failure of Nerve, is super. Like, if you were a process person, you read it and you're like, it's always good for Whitehead to have written an organizational leadership book. If you aren't process, you're like, wow, this is way more sensible than people saying concrescence all the time. But we'll talk about some of this more tomorrow. But it's my favorite book on leading communities in our contemporary context. And the whole premise of the book is that leaders need to attend to the relationships and the process of the organization and not try to manage all the problems to fix them or give some technological fix, or you have to learn the right things to get it to work. The bigger process, or the bigger problem is our anxiety and participation in the process. And it's, I don't know. There's only a few books I've read more than 2 or 3 times that weren't assigned, and that's one of them. Ken Wilber wrote a rather fun book, and I was mostly thinking of the first half, but it's on integral spirituality, and he summarizes a lot of different ways of understanding kind of open and relational evolutionary spirituality in really simple ways compared to other ones. And there are charts and pictures. So who doesn't like charts and pictures? You can also get this one on Audible, which if you like audiobooks versus reading because you live in Los Angeles and sit in the car a lot, that's always available. If the last section on the church, assuming it hasn't been reorganized by the time we get there based on your input, the last 2 chapters in my book on Jesus will be mostly what's going on in my head while we do it, and then these 2 chapters in a book I haven't done yet that, well, it's not done yet, but we'll talk about that. It's the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus. And if you're the part of what we'll talk about today is in chapter 1 on the nature of postmodernity. And if you like text freaking awesome as one word, freaking awesome, to 44222, then it will send you the PDF of the chapter of the book we're talking about today. But don't put a space in the dialogue thing. So the number 44222, you text them and say freaking awesome, and then it'll be like, give me your email address, and then you'll get an email. It's like, hey, here's the PDF of it. Anyway, so that those are helpful. I thought there's a bunch of articles on different things I thought I was going to recommend, except this is a 1-hour class done in a week, and I realized it was getting a long list. The Wilbur book is called Integral Spirituality. And the concepts of that, I'll make sure I mention them, or at least I'll try to remember to mention things that come from different books. But I usually read them and rework them. So don't assume we always agree. Well, a Cobb book, I like all of them. But Spiritual Bankruptcy is probably the one closest to the stuff we'll end up talking about towards the end, or towards the beginning, because there he talks about the process of secularizing versus secularism, religion, and he develops the notion of spirituality, in the vein of William James Charles Peirce, Whitehead. Oh, the first book I showed you is Religion in the Making. It's Whitehead, not Cobb. Religion in the Making. But the Cobb book, that was the one that was going to be on my list, was Spiritual Bankruptcy or God in the World, the beginning and end of it. But, you can only pick so many things, especially since I don't want you to spend all the time reading. I want you to engage in the ideas. If you spend as much time talking to someone that cares about the topic as you do reading, then I think you get the most you can out of both. And if the number of people you talk to about it that care are diverse from different locations and situations, it's even more fun. But all right. So are there any other questions and such before we hop in to stuff today? Ben just typed the word question, which is my favorite question. Or is that heads up that you're typing one? Oh, we are going to test the audio again. All right. If your headphones are plugged in, you might want to back them out.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You mentioned for credit that we'd be writing a paper, reading some of the books that you showed us.
Can you hear? No.
Yeah, I can hear. If you're in the class without your name underneath it, say your name. That way,
Oh,
if you
okay.
email me, I know who we're talking to.
Okay.
Zoom in on you so you can see you.
Uh-oh, now you're on.
Hi, my name's Linda.
Okay.
I have a question about I'm taking the class for credit, and you mentioned that we'd be writing a paper, reading some of the books that you showed us. And so my question is, because this is my first time learning about process theology, and you kind of mentioned that you don't want a paper just kind of regurgitating some of that work. And for me, it'll be the first time I'll be reading something on Whitehead, like the book you showed us, Religion in the Making. Like that would be an interesting book to look at. I'm already thinking, what could I write on? And so how does that happen? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like.
So this would be great. So if you're, I assumed if you're in this, you've already done the intro class before or in it with Monica. So if you haven't, email me, and like 2 weeks ago, I taught an introduction to process theology with Monica Coleman that we did online, and I did an introduction lecture to the book Religion in the Making for my online reading group. And I can just send you both of those. And if anyone has questions about other resources or topics, let me know, because I probably have 300 interviews with different process theologians on my website. So you could ask something and I'm like, well, I could try to tell you what a Methodist would say, but here's John Cobb talking about process and Methodism. And he's a Methodist and way more process than, I guess Whitehead might beat him. But in my mind, I'm totally cool directing or sharing stuff that exists. I would say that for the Monica told me ideally the papers won't go over 10 pages, and for your own well-being, don't go over 10 pages. I tend to quit reading when there's a max number of pages, and if you communicate what you need to communicate in less pages, that is more work than communicating it in more words. I know, because I had to cut 30,000 words out of my book, and my dissertation isn't done because it was so far over in word amount that I didn't write the last 2 chapters yet. So brevity and clarity and that stuff, gift. The other thing I'll say is you have a bit of time after the class before you have to turn in the whatever you're writing. So at the end of the class, if you say, here's the question I'm most interested in, and I would like to address it by doing X, then you can let me know. It could be like you're a youth minister and would like to think about how you would do confirmation, thinking process. And which I was a youth minister for 15 years, loved doing it. Or you could be a minister who preaches a lectionary every week, and you're wanting to think through a particular liturgical season, how you would model a different way of understanding the church using the perks of the liturgical season. That could be cool. You could, when we get done talking about the relationship of culture and technology and religious identity, say that you want to make a collage from 9 different kind of post a particular wisdom traditions website that's developed art that takes art from the wisdom traditions and bricollages it up. And you want to explore kind of post or multi-faith expressions of religion and spirituality using alternative forms of technology. That's totally cool with me too. You may want to write poetry. That's cool. You may want to do a series of blog posts. That's fine as well. I will basically say, is your question a good one that's somewhat connected to our class and you're excited about? Then I'll be like, it's great. Now tell me what, if I said you should do it, would mean that you got to explore it where the direction you want to explore it. And, short of being like, well, I want to write a haiku. Then I'm totally down. Plus, when you name the question, it may register like, okay, well, if that's what you're wanting to do, here's this one other resource, or here's this or that. And Ben is in the room. He's a walking process bibliography. I know y'all have met Andrew. He is the process bibliography. Like, literally, that's what he's in charge of. And he has it in his head, Andrew Schwartz. I've texted them and said, at one point, so-and-so said this and this. And then 2 minutes later, my Facebook has a link to the PDF of this random article from the 70s that Bernard Loomer wrote. That's Andrew Schwartz. So he's a great resource. So my thing is, at the end, name the question you want to spend your time answering for yourself, and then I will join you in that in whatever way it wants. I love teaching, so if that leads to you're like, okay, well, how about I read these things, and my final project is we talk about it for 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, great. I have no problem doing oral type stuff. Short of interpretive dance, I'm not really good at that, but I think I'm better at it than most people would give me credit for. I used to do competitive swing dancing. I had the lead in the musical The Boyfriend, which is a French swing musical. But that's an excursus because all of you are on mute, and I usually say stuff like that till I hear enough giggles to redirect back to what I was doing. But thank you, Linda. Linda, email me, and I'll send you links to the Intro to Process and Whitehead. And if you dig it, Phil Clayton and I, who's a professor at Claremont, are doing a walk through Religion in the Making in 2 weeks. It's like a 2-hour reading group on something like this, except everyone's heads are up and we're all talking at once and we walk through the book. So I'll invite you to that, and you can tell us conclusions from your investigations. Because honestly, reading books with people who haven't read it before is one of the greatest ways to learn stuff. Because after you have multiple degrees telling you what's up in there, then new eyes point out new stuff you would have never guessed. But so thanks, Lynn. How many other people, is this the only class they're in, or and they're very newish to process related things? So I see some hands in there. Those of you that are online, how many of you your reference point to process is 3 intensive this week. You're hardcore. So that's pretty awesome. Scott's taking them all as well. All right. So we will jump in, and I will. Okay, so chunk 1 will be on believing in skepticism in a postmodern context. Then I'll do a very truncated intro to at least the process notion of God and religion, and then we'll talk about where you locate religion in each moment of event, namely the 3 powers, and well, you'll figure that out when we get there. I want you to, but I also know one of the other fun parts of online is that you can stay at home and have some drinks and stuff while you do it. And I just found this a couple weeks ago at Trader Joe's, and if you had told me it existed, it is Pinot in a can. It's from Portland. Who's surprised?
Still no good.
Mary's doing lots of reading for her doctoral research, so her syllabus says whatever she has to read for her doctoral research is what's assigned for this class. And unless you're so type A that makes you uncomfortable, then I don't suggest it. But I made this koozie with Jesus on the bottom, so it's like I can just show you what the primordial nature of God incarnated through Jesus' full faithfulness looks like. All right. Okay. So here is chunky number 1. We're going to do this. All right. So one of the things that I think that's really important for religious communities today is recognition. Oh, they text freaking awesome to the number 44222. If you type it in your phone, if you don't have one that automatically texts the number, hit send, cancel, and then message it. Or they can email me and I can just send it to them directly. But it's more fun to use texting to PDF because it took me forever to figure out how to do it. All right. So the main thing I want to do at the beginning is look at what the nature of religion looks like in a postmodern context. And tomorrow we'll look at spirituality because a lot of people use the phrase like I'm spiritual but not religious. If you are necessarily a contrarian like me, you might be like, no, I'm religious, not spiritual, even though I don't know what either word means necessarily. So, but Whitehead was really specific on what these things mean in the history and how the relationship of religion and spirituality change over time, which in Religion in the Making, he hints at. And then if you read it close, you'll notice where he thinks we are in Western culture when he wrote it. And I will end up arguing in day 3 that if you continue the relationship that he describes to our current day with technology and culture, you actually have a number of shifts that aren't in there that will help us process the understandings of community. But the first thing to get is the difference of religion today includes a whole host of new situations. Now, when in the past you had debates around religious people, it was a debate in the public square of modernity between like the theist and the atheist, or N.T. Wright and Marcus Borg, or whatever these debates are. And what happened under Enlightenment, modern notions of truth, is that religious questions are things that are debated and settled through the shared use of reason and the assessment of available facts. And so the assumption going in to these contested notions of religion and truth was that if we were rational and thought through these things, then you're going to get to the right expression. And they look all sorts of different ways, right? If you're a conservative evangelical, you write a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And then when everyone doesn't convert, you write another book called Evidence That Still Demands Another Verdict, but it's the same as the previous one. And then you get in a fight and you have like Richard Dawkins write your book back, or Sam Harris style, and people are just like shooting back and forth, and everyone, the assumption is like, look, if you just look at the facts here and use the brain God or the spaghetti monster or no one but selected over evolution gave you, you'll agree with me. And we have these battles, and the assumptions running through it is that I think it fails to understand the collective transformation of the human subject in a postmodern context. And one of the ways of thinking about it is to look at all the different challenges to truth that come out of the Enlightenment. Like, one is our historical consciousness. We know that we are thrown into the world. Like, you are the product of a sperm that won a race and beat millions of competitors, and where you came out will determine what is available to you. Most of what we hold near and dear, the spectrum of possibility for us is like this big compared to the possibilities to all human beings at all other points in time. Why? Because if you and I were having this conversation 40 years ago, half of you wouldn't be in the room. If we were having it right now in Saudi Arabia, it would be on the DL, or it would be all Muslim theology. Like this, the arbitrariness of our accidental birth and location in the world gives us most of our things that matter most to us, and yet we also know it's accidental and historical. And this historical consciousness starts to relativize not just our understanding of the self, but most of our religious claims. And now I'm not saying it's final, but think of what the historical Jesus did to Christology, or a lot of them. But my argument is, it's not this one thing, right? You could have an argument. The historians arguing this, historians arguing this on each side, and boom, they settle it. Evidence that demands a verdict, or Jesus didn't ever exist. In that one field of Enlightenment thought, contesting truth, is all well and dandy, and I'm sure Ponnenberg could help you fix all that if that was the only problem. The only problem is there's plenty of other parts to this postmodern consciousness. So one is radical historical consciousness. Another is critical social consciousness. You're in Claremont, so this is the one everyone there has down completely. When we are aware that our givens not just are historically constructed, but we are part and connected and embedded in systems, that knowledge and truth are inseparable. Knowledge claims are power claims. We intuit these things. We know it. We can see it. We can smell it. And yet it doesn't just end there. You aren't just a cog in a system, even though it can be explained that way. We also have we have a pluralist consciousness. If you're me, you can live on a street where there are 5 different world religions available. You can have a Presbyterian elder who also works at the Taoist temple. And the nicest person on the street is a secular humanist who does contemplative prayer with Jesuits without telling them. And that's called 227th Street in Torrance. So we live in a world where you can't do the, here's one religion, here's another religion, we're the right religion, and obviously truth wins out, and that's why we're all Baptists. Like, we can't do these things anymore. And pluralist consciousness is a threat to the story most religious traditions tell about themselves. Pick anything written 400 years ago by almost any religious tradition, and you'll hear what it sounds like. And it sounds awkward now. Pluralist consciousness means like, no, the correct answer to how to avoid eternal conscious torment isn't Jesus. That just feels gross. It creeps us out, because I know people that are like way better human beings than me that aren't on Team Jesus. And even if you think that, like my in-laws, then you know it's problematic. And so you can come up with really weird ways where Jesus is secretly turning people of other faiths into Christians that they don't know about. You can just say, well, look, human beings are just POSs. So if God just saves one, clearly God's nice and awesome, because human beings are just fallen and junk. You could do all sorts of things, except what you're doing when you're trying to address pluralist consciousness brings to the fore. Like, you think a homeless dead Jew is the exegetical key to understanding truth and existence. Now, I might have a whole book talking about that, arguing for it, but nonetheless, you have to realize that's kind of crazy. And that's crazy before you think about our cosmological consciousness. If you were to pull out like a pen, and Ben was going to go to the corner of that room and put a little dot on the wall, and then you imagine California and all the space that's there, that one little dot on that one little wall is planet Earth. Now imagine the image of the invisible God and firstborn of all creation is a homeless dead Jew that rocked that one little dot. We may still think that. I'm just telling you, cosmic consciousness really starts to mess with what we understand to be the truth of religion. So, and if historical and social pluralist cosmic consciousness wasn't enough, then we have the masters of suspicion come: Freud, Marx, Nietzsche, Darwin. And when the masters of suspicion come, we develop false consciousness. And that's the one that makes the other two twice as dangerous. False consciousness is the awareness that we could believe something is rational, true, and logical, and at the same time have to doubt whether or not we believe it that way for reasons that are rational, logical. Like, and everyone's a little bit Marxist. Watch a TV preacher in a nice suit raising money for his airplane, and then what are you going to do? You're not going to go like, well, I prayed and the sweet Lord Jesus told me to take out a mortgage to help him out. You're going to say, this dude's in it for the money. And if you are sitting there, I mean, there's lots of them. Like you've internalized Freud and Marx and Nietzsche to such a point that when someone's talking to you, we naturally go, well, Trip, does he really still try to come up and be a Christian because deep down he wants his father's approval? Because historically, through generations, his family's always struggled with perfection of the firstborn approving of the father. And it makes all the sense. He's really intelligent and has come up with wonderful, crafty ways to keep Christianity around without Jesus being a dick and God hating everybody, mostly because of his daddy issues. And if he had worked those out, he wouldn't be here doing these things. But it's nice, Trip. If you have to be Christian, you're not a bad version. And what's my response to that? No, I know everything about my internal self and my daddy issues. No, you can't be there. Like the false consciousness, when added to historical and social and pluralist and cosmic consciousness, just screws us up. Paul Ricoeur, who, and if you're interested in this, I can send you the PDF of this, wrote these 2 articles about how this form of consciousness shapes and he's the one that pitched the word masters of suspicion. And at the end of it, he highlights that the masters of suspicion critique of truth is not about the content, right? When a theist and an atheist or Borg and Crossan are fighting or with Jesus Seminar versus N.T. Wright or whatever it is, like it's not going to arrive at truth because we got the content right and we're rational. The critique of the masters of suspicion is the point of origin. The individual who's trying to articulate truth, faith, religion, and such. That the possibility of having rationality, certainty, objectivity, there's no safe harbor where you have access to objective, rational, certain truth. Because every place that you engage it is a contested space. And this is and Paul Ricoeur is the one that wrote the article on the Masters of Suspicion. He's a philosopher, University of Chicago. Ricoeur is Ricoeur, and in it he has this really sweet line where he says that we may live in something like a post-religious period of faith. That is to say, the dialogue of the believer and the atheist is not anymore a dialogue with the other, but a dialogue with oneself. It's not a dialogue with the other, but with oneself. I think that now, if we are to have a life-giving and a living form of religion, we can't try to go back to a world where the religious truth is an objective, certain, rational thing contested in public where conclusions arrive at. Now, we are all simultaneously a skeptic and a believer at the same time. We're believing skeptics, skeptical believers, and this line of division runs right down through us. Now, I think that this observation opens up quite a bit of possibilities, because it means that we don't need to understand faith primarily as assent to ideas. In the book, I joke about this coming up when it comes to Jesus with C.S. Lewis's trilemma, where he's like, Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord, which all of you that have passed New Testament class know that at no point in the New Testament does Jesus and or anybody say Jesus is God. It took the church a couple hundred years to get around to making such an observation. And the observation was about the resurrected Christ and not the historical Jesus. And nonetheless, you all know that. But C.S. Lewis comes up with this one where the correct answer of faith is a label applied to the person Jesus. And it's a horrible missiological strategy to ask your friend about the person you apparently call Savior and Lord, or whatever way you talk about Jesus that makes him cool and important and central to you, to be like, so do you think he's lying? Like, that's, just say instead of Jesus, mom. So do you think your mom is a liar, a lunatic, or lovable? And you're like, anyway. So, but that trilemma does is why it's not persuasive. And if it is, I'm not sure it's genuine Christian faith with much depth to it. It's applying a label as if what we're assenting or pointing to with our religious truth is some datum that we have to correctly assess. If you've ever read the New Testament, you'll notice how effective Jesus is at answering rather straightforward, objective theological questions. He answered 2 of them, mostly to point out to rich people that don't care for the poor that they're scumsuckers. That is the only time he was really good at answering questions. The rest of the time, he would try to screw you up, tell a story that the church still doesn't know exactly what it means, but if you listen to it long enough, it disturbs you. Jesus, world's worst systematic theologian. It's just really frustrating, actually. The only time apparently he was real clear about content was on the road to Emmaus. And, it's at the end of the Gospel of Luke. They're on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus runs into 2 of his homeboys who don't recognize him post-Easter for some reason. And they start talking to him about Jesus. And it says, and he opened up the scriptures to him and explained everything, running through the law and the prophets to explain what just happened. And they don't write it down, obviously, because I guess we'd be out of a job if we're preachers. I don't know why you don't write that down. They didn't. The only thing they wrote down was that the truth was recognized in the breaking of bread, in the relational encounter with Christ, not in the ideas that were there. So, and yet, after modernity reshaped what it meant for us to have faith, or the notion of truth, to these objective or certain types of things, we actually thought that was effective communication. And so in the book, when I say Jesus is freaking awesome, it is more a joke for a 4th option, and there's a long story in there connected to it, but you can read it if you want. But the skeptical believer is a postmodern relationship to truth. And Paul Tillich kind of talks about there are 3 different layers of truth. One is the surface level, the words and stuff, and you're like, oh, I believe this. And then whatever your beliefs are, could be creeds, could be confessions, could be your favorite hymn, could be whatever is on your church website, or whatever your mom told you to say every day for a long period of time, and now you don't know how to wake up without saying it. I don't know. But he said there's that. And then there's this other layer that where faith is not so much about assenting to something, but being grasped, being seized, being known. And that depth dimension is the type of faith that occupies Paul most of the New Testament, is this the sense where faith has to do with having your life opened up and revealed, seized, grasped. There's lots of words you can use, ruptured, opened. But that is an existential type of encounter. It's like falling in love or losing your partner. It's an event that goes and tears asunder the world you had before it happened. And everything that happened before it, you would call old. And where you are. And the third element of faith is faithfulness. And Cobb talks a lot about this. But it's fidelity. It has to do with giving yourself to something, seeking to embody and practice it, and that kind of thing. And all three levels, are there and are important. But when truth was reduced to the subjective thing, you can test it in truth on sides, then the other two elements really waned. And Jesus emphasized the second and the third quite a bit more, and so did Paul. And I think it's important when we're beginning to think about what religion looks like today. And then to make a lot more sense on day 3, we talk about the current culture and stuff, but to realize that what we mean by religious truth and what it means to be a practitioner of religion, a religion today, isn't something that makes the non-religious external. You're all skeptical believers at the same time. And I've said some version of this with more stories and jokes at churches that are Southern Baptist churches in Oklahoma to Unitarian ones in Berkeley. And it starts to make sense to people in both places. So that'd be chunk 1. So we can pause there if there are questions and such. If not, chunk 2 is y'all are so talkative. For those of you that read Religion in the Making, Whitehead, what we just talked about, tells the story a bit differently, but makes the same observations. That human beings are a process. They emerge in this long scientific story. And one of the things that happens for human beings and other species and things, but I don't think we have to talk about that right now unless someone's really into proto-religious ethnography among other sentient beings. But Whitehead observes that Homo sapiens have this transition in their history where religion emerges, where language and religion first take shape in rituals. And these rituals become avenues for early human species to actually bring their emotions to consciousness, to have language and experiences to acknowledge the emotionality that has been present previously at a more instinctual level to meet your physical needs, be it through cooperation of your community, food, reproduction, that kind of stuff. And what happens by ritualizing through the use of language, practices, is we become conscious of the emotional energy. And I mean emotion in a deep sense, not your feelings. Emotionality in this deep sense. And when we become conscious of it and have the language to talk about it, you have the emergence of conscious social biology, emergence of religion, and this is the emergence of non-need-based conscious experience for human beings. And if this is interesting and you want more details, I'm summarizing what he takes a while to say. And then he says the next stage in the development of religion is this one where the emotions that emerge through the gift of language and ritual and community, and religion begins at a communal sense. You get the emergence of beliefs. And beliefs have a history and change over time. And what they do as they change over time is they critique the rituals and the systems of religion. If you think of it in a very just a very, very basic sense, that you move from a archaic type of consciousness to a magical one. And that's where you see rituals and emotions. And as beliefs start to come in, those very same narratives and experiences become mythic. And what do mythic frameworks do? But they provide a critiquing point for the prophet, and this could be meant broadly, towards the community who shares the rituals and experiences. And so you'll get something like Hosea that's like, hey, have y'all thought about not taxing poor on Sabbath? They're not allowed to work. You're not supposed to work. You're taxing them. I actually don't care about your worship right now. This is what Hosea says. This is translated literally from the Hebrew. He's like, I'm really pissed. Your worship service is great. I personally am not in the smoke machines and guitar solos, but yay, who knows? But I actually don't want that. What I would really like is mercy and justice. And if you think doing the ritual things and telling these stories and evoking these emotions is somehow a substitute or primary over the actual transformation of the material reality of the oppressed, then you missed the point. Did you know? I heard you when you were in Egypt. Like, my job's like the liberating one. And now you're doing the same thing Pharaoh did. What's your problem? Like, you can see this right through the story of Scripture. Whitehead actually mentions it briefly, that the Bible is a record of the evolution of religion. And he has this wonderful respect for religious traditions, and that is, you'll see if you want to read it. And what he wants to point out is that what you're seeing through the history of religion is the emergence of the Spirit. There's a spiritual emergence that comes when you have language, rituals, collective experience, the possibility of cultivating conscious desires beyond meeting your own needs, for the horizon of your investment, your care to be beyond your tribe, that you have this growing sense of consciousness where your desire for well-being is more than simply your own tribe. And you can see it emerge through the history of Israel and Scripture, and you can actually do this with a number of world religions. But and Cobb retells this story in different ways. And I know it's in Spiritual Bankruptcy, a summarized version in it. But what's the Structures of Christian Experience? Oh, that's one of my favorites. Anyway, for that 1 hour class with 15 books on the list, that's on there. So what he wants to do is then say, like, at this one point you get where the evolution of religion begins to shift from communal to a more individual trajectory. And what he wants to talk about is he'll talk about solitariness being the essential part of religion is a solitary thing. So where the prophet who speaks against what is the case on behalf of what could be, will be the case, the emergence of religion through its rituals, emotions, myths, beliefs comes what he calls a period of rationalization, which, for him, he's not that postmodern yet. Rational is not a dirty word, and he develops it in contrast with Descartes in the book, so he doesn't mean quite what we all normally mean. But what he wants to point out is a religion emerges first where a social world actually begins to emerge. That the human beings' emergence of language, all these things, is connected to religion, and in religion is how those cultures are critiqued and pushed to expand the network of well-being and community. and eventually it gets to the point where world consciousness emerges, and world consciousness has not a society or a community or a tribe as its holder, but the individual. And so when he talks about religion being something you do in your solitariness or as an individual, he's not saying something that a process person would never say, like you're not a relational being and all that kind of stuff. What he's saying is that true religion is inseparable from living a life of conscious integrity for the well-being of all. And so he calls true religion is world loyalty. And he goes, now I know if you take scripture as a stories that testify to this growing spiritual consciousness where your own well-being is understood to be perfected by investing in the all and not just your tribe, not just your family, not just your nation, not just this or this, but in the well-being of all, then you see the emergence of spiritual world, global consciousness, or whatever way you want to talk about it. Schleiermacher says basically the same thing in On Religion, Speeches to the Culture Despisers in different ways. There's a whole bunch of people who have said similar things. But what I want to emphasize is that for him and for all sorts of different relational worldviews of religion, there is a growing potential in religion because the truth, faith, all these things are dynamic and connected to the individual and the individual's participation in the community, and not just a set of objective external truths you get in right relationship to or you do and that kind of thing. And so the story of religion is a historical story, which you could tell his story as if you're accounting history. But for him, it's also a story of God cultivating depths of spiritual possibilities in sentient people that weren't there when human beings first emerged. And that the ongoing dynamic between God and the world creates the possibility for greater depths, for greater he's totally down for adventure, zest, and things. So I say that because when we then start to think about the shape of spirituality today, the relationship between peoples in culture and technology and in light of contemporary crises, when we start to think of what it would mean to be the church, to have community and things, I think it's important to be able to take a step back and take the big view on each topic. But then he says, don't just in there, that the big view is serving the purpose of helping us understand what it's like to be an individual who has world loyalty, to stand in solidarity with creation, these type of things. And a lot of those stories, and one of the real practical things about this, when I was a campus minister at UNC in North Carolina, I thought that the worst thing that had happened prior to me getting to this campus ministry group was before you had this like militant, nonviolent Anabaptists leading the group who had taught them all sorts of really stuff about, they all got arrested together for the first time, all sorts of cool stuff. But all the Bible things were like pre-edited. The only thing we ever read out of the Bible was like the Sermon on the Mount and examples of why the Sermon on the Mount's awesome, and not the other stuff. And I'm sorry, but like there's a huge gift the moment you realize that our scriptures are testimonies of God's self-investment in particular people in their actual context, bringing them to whole new spiritual breakthroughs. Even ones that are complete idiots, like Abraham. He pimped his wife twice, and that's in the Bible, and God brought a people out that end up deciding that people without jobs deserve a living wage, and it's in his stinking documents. That came out of like Abraham. He is a scumbag and awesome potential. Like the whole narrative of Israel, God appears to be extremely faithful because look what you're working with. And they're all sitting there writing the text. When you read a story about someone being really confident God said to slaughter your enemies, you can either avoid it because you know the correct answer is love your enemies, and Jesus said it, so don't read it, or you read it and know that that is part of our history. All of us have horrible things we've done, said, felt, and if you cover them up, nothing good happens. You got to bring the junk to the light. And I'll tell you, if you're a campus minister 2 years after 9/11, it is really easy to think that Noah seemed reasonable. You're like, I don't yell at anyone else on this piece. God shut the door. These scumbags been mocking me. Like all sorts of things. You know those feelings. The scriptures actually show people in this wrestling with trying to figure out how the living, life-giving God not only are present in these narratives, but how they get turned against ourselves to challenge our preconceived notions. And you see this growth and development of spirit running through it. And we all know this. This is why mainline Protestants don't read Paul. That old junk's always with us, and it creeps back in. He'll have this badass line. In Christ, there's neither male nor female, but you put a hat on and shut up. And you're like, whoa, did you read Galatians 3:28? He's like, I wrote it. I'm pissed right now. Like, the story of human beings and religion is one where you don't go from one stage to another to another. I mean, maybe Mother Teresa and Gandhi did this or something, but everyone else, we transcend stages, but they're included. And part of what Whitehead gives is this beautiful account of the evolution where knowing the dirt and the ugliness and acknowledging it in us creates a possibility for more life-giving forms of religion because you aren't suppressing or denying the stuff that's there. You don't suppress or deny your doubts. You don't suppress or deny the truth that you're wrestling with or your history or the ugliness. There's kind of two sides of it. Today, in postmodern shapes of religion, you have to grow up and you have to wake up. Growing up has to do with these stages of development. And if you haven't ever read like James Fowler's Stages of Faith or anything like that, you can see it pretty well in there. The Ken Wilber book will summarize a bunch of different ones. But in it, you get you realize that, I mean, we talked about there's archaic, magic, mythical a minute ago, and then rational. Pluralistic consciousness emerges, and that's what is shocking the system right now. But my argument is that, and what Whitehead is describing, is that the emergence of one new layer of social conscious development doesn't mean you kill everything else that went before it. You transcend it, but you include it. It's a holarchy and not a hierarchy. The presidential election is like the greatest way of watching three different value memes or stages of consciousness battle it out. If you're still feeling the burn because you're voting for Bernie tomorrow, you're very likely a pluralistic stage of consciousness, and you know that Hillary represents that very rational Enlightenment one, and it is better than that rather mythic and violent archaic thing you heard before with orange hair, but it's inherently problematic, and so you need to vote. You need to get there, and you need to piss them off because she's just as bad because everything that's not where you are isn't good. And then the Hillary people are like, look, this is nuts. Look at these touchy-feely postmodern-y whatnots. They aren't even rational. They just want to come together. And I mean, he literally had an ad that was playing some junk from Woodstock, except 23-year-old hipsters were listening to it. What is this about? I don't understand. They need to be sensible and rational and thought through. We can all work together. We just have to all agree and work things out. And look, when you grow up, you'll agree with us. I'm not trying to patronize you because I am patronizing you. Right? And then you hear that and you're like, oh, what's going on? And then there's the Trumpites, and they're like, make America great again equals let's devolve back into this other stage because only one stage can be right at any one period of time, and it's not this one. But I love Mexicans, and they just don't want to support me because I'm building a wall. And you're like, are you allowed to say that on TV? Did you not just, did you not just bleep it out? And then you find out that your uncle agrees with him. He's like, it's not racist, just being honest, man. You know what I mean? You're like, no, I don't. I do not know what you mean. And we have this battle that's going on culturally. We have people at different stages, and they're all either or. When you get to one stage, the others are really wrong. And what Whitehead's describing is this integral, complex vision where each stage transcends, but it is included. And that a holistic type of postmodern spirituality is one that creates an environment where we all get to grow up. And I think it's important because every kid is born at stage one, literally. Like, I could tell you when Elgin had very magical thinking because he really wanted us to get an elf that was clearly fake to put on a shelf to spy on him, to tell St. Nick whether he was good or bad. And, you know, as a very enlightened philosopher, I'm like, I don't want to support this. But his whole world worked that way. If I had the door opener to our garage behind my back and he used the force and it opened or closed, it opened or closed because he was using the force. And you couldn't explain it to him otherwise. And I'm like, well, what if it's not working right now? He's like, the force is weak with me today. But that's where his brain was. It's totally cool. And then you get to a much more mythic one. I can remember when he starts to tell me that Jonah didn't have to be swallowed by a fish for the story to be true. And I was like, yes, parenting win. But there was other times where he was really concerned about his dad. Dad, I know you're the minister, but like, how is it true if you don't believe it? You know, and it's normal. Like, it all starts there. But when we have religious communities or understandings of religion where there's only one part of that ongoing developmental process, where we're beginning and going through the stages that humanity took the last couple of thousand years to get through, now a lot of us are like gone up 4 or 5 stages before we finished our 30s. That's a great thing. But for us to pass on religion in a holistic, life-giving way, then we need to create communities that allow people to be at each stage through the process, and they grow up and develop, and then they can emerge rather than being in communities with one single stage present. And the funniest part about this is statistically, mainline Protestants, our retention rate, I don't think is connected to the fact our kids tend to agree with our social stances. It's because we basically shame their intuitions for a long period of time. I've worked in the South and here. I've confirmed almost 200 teenagers, and they regularly at odds with their postmodern parents in a mainline congregation when they're developing their enlightenment, nice, rational self. Well, Foucault and Derrida don't make sense until you've gone through the other one. That's just, like, you don't skip magical thinking, and the next thing you're doing is you're rhizoming it with Deleuze. That's just not how it works. Didn't work that way for the whole history of the West. But what Whitehead is saying is healthy expressions of religion are ones that allow us to grow up faster in community, in ourself, that humanity as a whole has been processing through over the years. So that's the process of growing up. Spirituality, which we'll talk about tomorrow, I like to call the process of waking up. And that is developing process people. The difference between God and creativity. If you don't know this, ask your friend later. Ben's going to explain it to Linda when we get done. But God and creativity are different things. Creativity is the principle of identity. And waking up is a process of enlightenment, a process of recognizing what you are constitutively made of is this very same thing all things are made of. And you lose anxiety around preserving yourself when that connection's made. The Eastern religions tend to focus on it, the mystics in the West. But nonetheless, there's a process of waking up, which is recognizing your shared identity with all of existence, that you're a creature of creativity if you're a process person, and growing up is about the sense of self and your self's investment in a larger and larger group, from family to tribe to nation to world. Anyway, the waking up, growing up. There's the other two parts, and I don't know if we'll come back to them, but just because I think it's catchy, is growing up, stages of religious development, and that's more consciousness that's based at the level of shared social things around our beliefs and stuff. Waking up is that internal process of dealing with yourself in relationship to all. There's showing up, which has to do with when we address questions, we don't lower our existence to one single perspective. And Whitehead in the Adventures of Spirit talks quite a bit about this, that when you hear process people say everything has subjectivity, or that there's an inside of everything, like subjective experience, like our sense of self, and an objective side, namely how you're experiencing me right now is as an object, but you're pretty confident, I hope, that I'm a human being on the inside. So, since they're subjective, objective side, to understand a person, right, isn't to just understand that person as an object. Like, you can't know me completely by checking out my Facebook or asking people about me. There's a sense of knowing me that I know that you don't know, and you won't know it, and you don't know it. So you're able to assess it at these multiple levels. But when you collapse all things to one single level, then you're not showing up to the whole depths of existence. There's a lot of other examples of that. And the other is cleaning up, and that's dealing with the shadow material that we collect as we grow up. No matter like how, and you'll get this when you work at a congregation. You'll be like, how is a person that leads our like justice Bible study and it's like so committed to the church, also the one who has the emotional maturity of a 4-year-old. They like got my back when my exegesis is a little creates some tension in the group. But the moment someone wants to talk about changing the church carpet, they throw a hissy fit. Well, it doesn't matter what stage you're at or all these other things if you aren't cleaning yourself up and learning to re-own and reintegrate those shadow or broken or repressed elements in yourself. And that's another side of the solitariness of religion that Whitehead will want to emphasize. He won't use those 4 words. Those were just, actually, I'm not sure where I got them from. I either made them up or I stole them from somewhere, but I don't know. Growing up, showing up, waking up, cleaning up. But yeah, one example of it that I found helpful is, if you all know Richard of St. Victor, then you had a medieval church history class. If you don't, then you probably don't know him. But he wrote some of the like sweetest stuff on the Trinity ever. He wrote some of the best articulations of the Christian notion of love you'll ever read. The Western notion of the Trinity that Augustine talks about didn't find its doxological expression until him. And this mystic preached the Crusades. Now you can either, in which if you're postmodern-y type of pluralistic consciousness, what you'll probably say to yourself is, yeah, patriarchal, hierarchical piece of caca. This is why he's horrible. And, you got your like judgment thing going on right there. Like, this is bad. And I think what Whitehead is offering is, no, everyone is like so constructedly situated in the world they're in, and he could have developed to the peak of religious growing up at his time, and yet the boundaries of his vision ended at the edge of Christendom. And it doesn't mean we can't include these beautiful versions of holding yourself intact while attending in love to the needs of the other. Beautiful pictures he gives. And then expand the network in which that type of religious responsibility is due. He is a good example of how, if you can preach the Crusades, raising money like a preaching champ, and then the next Sunday unveil the depths of the Trinity, then you start to see how this process of growing up and waking up aren't the same. He's like a contemplative spiritual master, woke up on like ninth dimension of mysticiness. And then growing up, he had a horizon of well-being that ended at Christendom. And our religious communities and shapes in different communities, we need to attend to all kind of four elements to have a more holistic, relational, liberating, and life-giving perspective. So let's pause there. Going any further.
Preach the Crusades.
It was Richard of St. Victor.
Richard of Saint Victor. Thank you.
Oh, and who was the one that you were saying is beautiful articulation of the Trinity?
Yes, so Richard of St. Victor has these descriptions of the Trinity, the growth of the notion of love through mystical contemplation. He's one of the mystics that one of my friends who is a Hindu spiritual teacher likes Richard of St. Victor, but the edited volume of Richard of St. Victor has none of the sermons where he's explaining how you give money to the church to fight the Crusades. And so when you differentiate the stage of development you're at and helping us all grow there, I think mainline Protestant churches are really good at helping. Progressive churches can get people to kind of a postmodern social justice-y level of growth, and the whole time you probably haven't done contemplative prayer, or worship is uncomfortable. Like the waking up, the spiritual depth dimension of you connecting to existence in spiritual ways is a different growth level. So Richard of St. Victor, mystics across religious traditions are like, dude, was tapped in to the source, boom shakalaka. And then you read the other, his other sermons, and you're like, whoa. And I'm saying if you're a process person, your religious communities need to create space for us to belong at each layer, from a kid to magical, mythical thinking. And you want to help people be at those stages in the most loving and hospitable way. You are not in charge of moving people up stages. You're in charge as a community of faith at creating a healthy state and expression of each stage. So Richard of St. Victor is one of these where, like, if you were checking his like waking up spiritual mystical depth dimension chart, he's like off the chart. Then if you're checking his growing up stage of development, at his time, he was off the chart. He actually thought Italians and Spanish Christians were equal. What? What's that about? He's a liberal. But now we're like, dude, you can't like mystic that junk up and then the next moment be like, the Mohammedans are coming. You're not supposed to do that. Are you sure you talked to did you really taste the eternal? And I'm saying they're different things. That's what Whitehead's pointing out, is that religions in their ritual, material existence have stages of growth, and we can see them in Scripture. And each individual is invited to wake up and connect and plug in more deeply to existence. And congregations need to deal with both. Showing up has to do with thinking through problems in like first, second, and third person ways. And cleaning up is creating space in your community to process the hurt and baggage and all those things we talk about, deal with, that rarely get brought out. It's sad if the only time everyone's honest at your church is in the prayer of confession. But that's probably like the only time every week. I know Alicia and I will tell each other the truth. That's my wife. We're both ordained ministers. So we joke that if we have a fight and it's not done lingering because she hadn't come around agreeing with me yet, then we at least you'll be honest at church on Sunday because you're leading the prayer of confession. Anyway, the one way of even thinking about the stages of development as a leader or as a parent is to think that as the stages develop, Whitehead highlights 3 different things that grow and increase with each stage of development. One is complexity. Now, if you thought stage of development from humanoid species with language and those without, you could see a growth. But over time, as stages increase, complexity increases. Complexity does a number of things. It makes new things possible. It also means that you, as the individual, have to trust other people with things you don't know, which raises anxiety. Awareness of greater complexity can do all sorts of things, positive and negative, with greater potential. But if you think process-wise, like when the power increases over time, there's an equal growth for destruction or for positive things. Right? Like you could nuke something, or you could have a power plant. You can genetically modify food to grow in desert places with higher yields, or you can mess with a mosquito and have it wipe out populations through bites that are only selected to people with particular genes. And so you see what I'm saying? Like every new bit of complexity has these dynamic to it. The second thing that grows as we move up is freedom. We have more freedom now than we did before the emergence of markets. You can live places, marry people, move, all sorts of things. The freedom increases. A number of you that aren't related to historic kingly families have the ability to have influence and voice that you didn't before. Some of us got that perk in democracies before others. But as our stages, new freedoms become available. But freedoms, just like the power that grows as things become more complex, opens up a greater possibility for destruction or a more dignified existence. And the third thing that grows as we move up stages is that we become more inclusive. Who is in your kinship network? Your parents and family, those you need to make sure you kill enough things so you eat. Then it grows as we develop agriculture because we have to protect the land that we're growing things on. And you have to grow it in volumes where you need other families. Then it grows again over time. So like we have a growing kinship network. It becomes more inclusive. Jesus, one of the most challenging things of his teachings when he talks about the kingdom of God is, and I call it kingdom of God. It's in the book, but I like to call it kingdom of God just so that people ask me at church why I dropped the G. And you can say, well, because if you get rid of the G, you get rid of the cock and the crown, patriarchy and hierarchy. Church member will remember it forever. And then you're like, have you read the Bible? When Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, it's crazy because it's like a kingdom, but instead of like having a king, it's Abba. And if you've ever noticed Abba, like Abba's not like someone you come up in as like, oh, there's Abba. It's Judge Abba. No, you show up. It's not a murder trial. It's your adoption trial. And when Abba's king, you're like inheriting royalty. So you got to do the kingdom. Anyway, but what's challenging about those teachings around the kingdom of God is that he's intentionally saying the blessings, elections, all those things of Israel are being applied to everyone. And it really pisses everyone off. You remember in Luke 4 when he does his first sermon, the first half of it, liberals love to talk about the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, anointed me to preach good news of poor, recovery of sight to the blind, declare the year of liberation. And all of his hometown friends are just like, what's up, Joseph's son is rocking it out. It's like Youth Sunday or something, and the sermon's not horrible. And then like, oh, this is great. And then he goes, hey, do you remember that time Elijah, during a famine, helped a Gentile and not a Jew? That's what I'm doing. And they try to throw him off a cliff. So the other thing you notice in the passage is if you read Isaiah, he edits out the one line in the passage about violence. So I like to joke that when Jesus reads the Bible, he cuts out the violence and expands the blessing or something like that. But what he's doing, right, is he's inheriting the tradition. He's not going, this is horrible. He's inheriting it, critiquing it, and opening it up to a more inclusive stance. And today, in light of ecological crisis and all sorts of things, our connection in the economy, we need to do the same, because who it is we're including needs to be included in our network of blessing for people we don't have physical relationships with. They are mediated by the market or the environment that we have impact to. So as we move up stages, complexity, freedom, and inclusivity grow. And with each one, there's a dignity and a disaster connected to it. You could run most of the big challenges for the globe, and all three of those elements are there. And I think when you think of them, you're like, oh, now I can think what it's like to deal with these challenges in our religious tradition that moves towards a greater growth. For people of privilege, one of the biggest challenges to address things will not be helping them grow up. It's going to be helping them wake up so that they have an affirmation of their being, their sense of self, their value, that allows them to clean up the ways in which their identity is tied to external things like possessions or power, prestige. So when our identity is connected to external things, they're always in flux based on what room we're in. We compete against each other for more power or prestige or possessions. We compare ourselves to it. And anytime that's happening, you don't have the ability to sit there in your religious solitariness and make decisions anxiety-free for the well-being of others, because the others have you and your sense of self in jeopardy. And I think, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I think process gives one of the best, most beautiful ways of understanding spirituality that starts to address and open up some more beautiful articulations. And the key of focusing at the front on religion and then spirituality and then culture and technology is that when we get to day 4 and talk about the church, you don't start to come up with images or understandings of the church that only address growing up or just address waking up or something like that, or trying to come up with the perfect version where you can then explain to all the other Christians how you've arrived or something. But you have these relational communal dynamics in your head, and then turn to your situations or the images, different models of church and stuff. You'll find out that the biggest challenge that I think the church has is the process, our participation in the process of leadership, and not us finding the right techniques or technological tools or really sweet management tactics or how to do the perfect Facebook ads to your Easter sunrise service. Though I had a friend who paid $100 for a 1-hour webinar on how to do a Facebook ad for your sunrise service. And I was like, Jesus Christ loves you, but that was a bad idea. I would have done it for $50. But anyway, all right, Ben, how's it going in there?
I think you're making some wonderful jokes. And doing an excellent teaching. I think they're still alive, and some of them have been here all day. So
That's good. That's good. Well, when we get done, I'll tell you my messianic secret joke that's unrelated to the content of everything I said, but I've been working on it. And only nerds appreciate it. All right. Then I'll say one thing real quick, and then think about, you can name questions or topics, not just on what we've talked about, but where you want to go. So I have like 3 different outlines for this class, just because if Monica and John Cobb are the other 2, it's like I got to go all out just so that when you do reviews, you're not like, well, it was mostly good. And anyway, All right. So the last thing to think about, and this will get picked up tomorrow, but I may even restate it just so it's all in the head. But for process, one of the greatest gifts Whitehead does, and process thought, is articulate a different notion of power. And we don't have to describe why omnipotence sucks, but it does. But when you deal with Whitehead's description of what's at play in any one moment of becoming, there are 3 different powers. And if you write them down, and then when we talk about spirituality tomorrow, and then the role of culture and technology, and then the church, the best thing about knowing relational picture of power is that you can become clear about what you're responsible for as a member of the church and a leader. And we'll talk about that part more tomorrow, but just know this. You are not responsible for anyone other than yourself. You are responsible to them. The biggest insight I think process gives on how to think through leadership and congregational and community health, be it in the home and your church or alternative forms of community and stuff, is recognizing that you're using your power well and best when you give others the possibility of being responsible for what they're responsible for, by only being responsible for yourself, your feelings, your decisions, and being responsible to others. That picture of relational power and dignity and responsibility giving is strikingly similar to the very picture of it that God has in process thought. So there are 3 powers. First power is the past. Whitehead has a very specific scientific reason for why time machines won't work. But we don't have to do that right now because Ben's volunteered to explain it when we get done. And I know he has his quantum mechanics stuff already. That Whitehead-Einstein debate notes just right in his back pocket. So I'll let the master take care of it. But the past is one of the 3 powers. It's the inheritance of our situation. It's not changing. You relate to the past as objective, and not just like the past, but like the past that just passed. Like the past that just passed, meaning the first half of this sentence, that you have to have that past present to you in some way, giving it more consciousness, or you don't even remember what this long run-on sentence was that was about the past because the past isn't present to you. But if the past is present to you, then this sentence about the past and its power on the present is much more sensible. But if it's not, you're going to have to download this and re-listen to it. And when you do re-listen to it, the entire thing will be in the past. And its sensibility will be made present to you by becoming present at that particular moment, which was past, but the past is now present in that moment of becoming. So that, very clear.
That was good.
I need a can of that.
I would pretend I didn't practice. But and why I think that's important is when individuals or communities or God believes they have the ability to change what has happened, you make horrible decisions. Pause for a second and think to the worst parenting mistake you've ever made. Mine all begin like this. Elgin, I can't believe you did that. Now, in light of the fact you have done it, I'm going to embarrass myself, humiliate you, and shame you because the past should be changed, and I'm pissed about it. Now, watch this. My identity's in, and you're just going on. You've done nothing. Vent that the past is something you're not in charge of. And it leads to us thinking that we're somehow these magical masters of power. Like, go back in time. Do this. And what are we wanting to do when we want to change the past? We're wishing that we were the only power present. We want power that God doesn't even have in process thought. We won't even give the past the dignity of being past. When you suppress it, when you oppress it, or when you insist it didn't happen, you leads to all sorts of horrible, toxic relationships. You make dumb decisions. Because you won't admit reality. Some of the past is present. We don't bring it up to the surface and deal with it. So undealt with past is destructive. Other past we insist has to be different. And so our relationship to every moment of becoming is like we're a tyrant rather than a lover. In other parts of the past, we don't give the dignity of space in our present. And Whitehead, unlike plenty of other philosophers that have made this observation, including Freud, points out that we relate to the past differently. And you are in charge to the way you relate to your past. Doesn't mean you're in complete charge, but you are in charge. If we're as America, we can decide when our story begins. Does it begin after the Holy Bible moved onto these shores and straight white landowning men of European descent built a city on a hill full of liberty and justice and other amazing things Jesus likes that we had to teach as savages and all those people we stole? Or maybe you want to start it a little earlier, because the past is still going to be there, but how you know the past, where you start the past, and how you tell the past leads to you either being a complete jerk or possibly more loving and attentive to a greater group of well-being in the present. So the past, lots of examples. You could probably start thinking of them now. And usually I like to give a very personal one and then some macro one and say them both sarcastically and over the top enough you remember it and think about it later. All right, second one is our decision. In every moment of becoming, you do something. One of the most insipid problems is people who believe they don't have a choice. When you forget that you don't have a choice, then you render the past a totalitarian. In every moment, there's a decision being made, and you participate in that decision. It doesn't mean you can determine it, but you do have agency. To deny your agency is to deny your self, to deny your relationships, to deny the openness before you, to deny the dignity of these sentient, social, linguistic, relational beings that God's been working on for 14 billion years. You got to own that junk. Like one of the most amazing adventures that ever existed. Like, when the Big Bang happened, I think we would not have guessed that there would be creatures that hold eye contact while making love, go to symphonies and enjoy it, and then do the most hurtful things with that very same person. They're all possibilities. But we have choice, and when we deny our choice, then we get determined. By something else. One of the other elements of that is that it shows up a lot in the logic of the violator and the logic of the victim, their relationship. But the idea that you can't do anything else is how you stay a victim and how you stay a violator. Read the story of Zacchaeus. When you read the story of Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus has his being affirmed by Jesus, and he comes down and he's like, oh, junk. I have a giant wine cellar because I've been exploiting all these people. I'm going to sell half my stuff and help them out. They used to be I exploit you number 1, 2, and 3, but now they have names and faces. Crazy thing. I don't feel like this is a very good relationship to have, but we should have a party at my house. I'm totally down, totally down. Jesus is like, that's right. Let's go. Now, the victims right here, they clearly do the right thing. They go, whoa, we can't do that. This is Zacchaeus. Our identity is constitutively determined by having no agency in being his victim. If you think, Jesus, that you can be the Christ and go to his house, you got another thing going. And Zacchaeus is like, let's go. And what does Jesus do? He disarms the system of victim and violator where he, Zacchaeus, feels trapped being a puppet of the empire, and the others feel trapped as being his victim, and shows them that you have choices, and the choices that open up liberation and possibility are entering into relationships with nice wine cellars. And that is just an echo of Jesus' first miracle in the Gospel of John, where weddings still have wine run out. And that's why I was drinking some while we're doing this. Maybe. But you have a choice. And what you have a choice to do isn't everything, but it is what's there. And the third part, and this is Whitehead's, is that we have possibilities. The third power of possibilities. This is God's offer for the future. And there's a long story about this. And if you've never heard how the lure and all those ideal aim, blah, blah, blah works, I'll send you a longer video of me explaining it. But what I want you to hear is that in each moment, no one is in charge of the past, but we are in charge how it's remembered and how it's empowered. God comes to each moment, whether it's in Sheol or somewhere in between there in heaven, because you can't escape the love of God in Christ Jesus, who for process people is the primordial nature of God. And Ben can explain that. So you have at each moment the past and possibilities being offered, but what is possible in each moment isn't utopia. It's the most beautiful, true thing that can happen. God doesn't look at you at this moment and say, here's my offer. You're not in Southern California. You're in France because Tripp mentioned wine, and we should clearly all go there together. That's not available. I wish it was. It would prove my point beyond measure. But tapas and wine, that would be great. But we have possibilities, and God looks at what actually is possible and says, do the most beautiful, adventurous, and zesty thing. Abraham, come with me. And Abraham and Sarah go off. Then that Hagar thing happens, and God's like, you think this is a good idea? Check this out. I'm going to build a whole nother nation with Hagar, and guess who's the first person in the entire Bible who I'm going to come give an annunciation scene to? Hagar. Guess who's the only person in the Bible who's going to get to give me a name? Hagar. Choke on that, covenant people. You're like, God's like, you can't handle this. I'm going to work with what you think are mistakes and what you think is awesome, and we're going to bring junk out because I deal with what's there, and the grace of God is giving possibilities to places we don't think are possible. And so as we grow up and we wake up, more possibilities become available to us. But we can't get away from the third part of the decision, which is ours. The third power is ours. So God works with the world and not on the world. God works with the world and not on the world. Theologically, this means that God is not a metaphysical exception to our metaphysics, but it's exemplar. We're all dealing with the past and bringing together the most beautifully adventurous and zesty thing. God is not just in the world. God transcends the world. Namely, because the world actually transforms God. God doesn't give possibilities out of nowhere. God gives possibilities out of knowing the world completely. The world is in God because God feels the world and knows it from the inside out. But the world is in God that way, but God is in the world by incarnating God's self in each moment, giving a possibility to it that comes from God into the world. There's a lot more to say there, but it will all connect to what we do tomorrow. I know I have 8 minutes. So the other thing about this to emphasize is that Whitehead, in understanding this image of God, rejects God being ground of being, ultimate being, the God of being. God rejects God as moralist and rejects God as judge, and argues the best way to understand God is this weird Galilean vision. He borrows it from a homeless dead Jew who really caused a lot of trouble back in the day, praying for enemies, turning the other cheek, bringing centurions and Gentiles to hang out with prostitutes and even priests, which, the longer the church goes on, which is the real outcast has changed, hasn't it? That's why I always think, if you're a minister and you just kind of read it, you're like, early on in life, you're like, yeah, Jesus is hardcore because he hangs out with lepers and prostitutes. Then after you hang out at church long enough, you're like, Jesus is hardcore. He hangs out with religiously professionals. Can you believe that? You see what this guy does? Religious professionals. Where else in culture do people go with a small sense of self that only by helping do they ever feel any worth? But the church, the therapy room, or politics. And Jesus even hangs out with all three. Woo! Anyway, the growing up, waking up, and all that kind of stuff is. Someone asked a question. Growing up, and that's religion. The stages of development, however you want to talk about it. Waking up is the spirituality, connected principle of identity, contemplation, mystically goodness. Showing up at truth through prism from multiple perspectives and not collapsing truth to an objectively connected thing. Truth perspectives in first, second, third person. Cleaning up is the hard work of dealing with our shadow self, our wounded self, our pseudo self, our whatever word you read recently that connects to that. See if place in the fish to use the bathroom. I saw that similar logic when he decided we could not go into the ocean anymore because he realized there are no bathrooms in the ocean. So what is it made of? He was like, out of nowhere, he's like, Dad, do fish pee? Yeah, I guess. You can ask Google, but I'm pretty sure. Do they have bathrooms? No, I think that's why your fishbowl stinks. I knew it. We should just go to the pool. I'm like, Elgin, our rent's twice as much because we're close to the ocean. So you better like it. No. All right. If everyone that's in the room, make sure Ben gives you my email address. It's trip@homebrewedchristianity.com. Those of you on here, you can just grab it off there and send me any questions or topics. Or if you want any of the stuff I said I could email to you, do that. I'll send it to you. And we'll get together tomorrow. We'll talk about spirituality. And then when we get done with that, the one and only Barry Taylor will be here, who I'm just super pumped that he's going to join me. One of his areas is like Marshall McLuhan. And so I think we'll do Marshall McLuhan's thing on technology and the ages of technology, which you'll think of in your head because we talked about truth from first, second, and third person today, and the growth of religious and stages. You'll think about what's the role of technology in connection to new stages of development religiously, and then go, now what does our new technological stage do for new understandings of religious community, truth, and gathering? And then in fourth time, we talk about new understandings, articulations of the church. You are going to blow me away and say stuff because the church, who knows what the church is going to look like? I won't till Thursday. That's when I'll know because Ben's going to tell me, right, Ben?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, yeah, if anyone has a topic, question, or whatever, throw it out there or email it to me. We got like 3 minutes. And I've never said anything in 3 minutes. Even my vows at my wedding were long.
Any questions?
Or something really cool. Someone learned something today from John or Monica that just was like, oh, that blew my mind. So I've just been sitting here while you said stuff. Did Monica do the bumper car story?
Yeah.
I borrowed that thing. That works. All right. Well, if you are on the internet, then you're more than welcome to join my next thing. I'm doing we have like a twice a month webinar thing for my podcast, and we're about to do it. And Eric Hall, who was a former student there, who's writing the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to God, is going to get on, and he's supposedly going to tell me how I'm wrong. But
That shouldn't be too hard.
oh, Well, then we'll have to add that to the agenda, Ben. You can tell me how wrong I am.
Well, it depends on who you vote for tomorrow, but I'll leave it at that.
Oh, all right. Well, I didn't know what to do after everyone else dropped out, so I, but you see, that's a trick question. In Claremont, the correct answer is Jill Stein. You can't even do anything else. I know it was a trick question, Ben. So I tried, said nothing.
Good job.
But I will say that on Thursday, I'm actually getting to interview Sally McFay that morning. And if you know
Oh.
Sally McFay, then you know why I'm really excited. So if a number of stuff from her books comes out in the next couple of days, it's because I'm reading it because I'm going to talk to her. And if you have stuff about contemporary ecclesiology and things you want me to ask her, let me know, because she's been doing seminars on post-structuralist understandings of community, and I don't know what she thinks about them, but I'm going to get to ask her. So I'll be like, I'll ask her questions because it's Sally McFay, and I've only asked her to do the podcast like 50 times, and that was from 2008 on. Now she said yes because John Cobb told her I wasn't horrible.
The lure works eventually.
Yes. All righty. Well, y'all have a
Oh.
wonderful, wonderful afternoon and or evening, depending on where you are.
Dude.
Peace.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks.